Good afternoon and welcome to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Alistair McCraw and I'm chairing the meeting today. The meeting has been called as the petition organiser has requested that Overview and Scrutiny review the steps the Council has taken in respect of validating his petition. Overview and Scrutiny are asked to review the steps that the Council has undertaken and establish whether the correct procedure was followed in line with the Council's petition scheme. The Chair will also detail at the appropriate time what is outside the scope of the review and therefore will not be discussed. Now, I'd just like to go through some domestic arrangements. First of all, can I remind you that microphones should be turned off when not in use, that you do not interrupt other speakers, and if you're attending the meeting to speak and you persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure mobile phones are either on silent or switched off. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed, and by entering this meeting as a speaker, you're also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Item 3 on the agenda is the apologies for absence and substitutions. I'll pass to the Governance Officer.
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies received. We have a full committee today.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any such to declare? OK, so now item 5, I'd like to introduce the members of the committee apart from myself. These are Councillor Dawson, Councillor Jane Gould, Councillor Catherine Grandin, Councillor Mary McLaren, Councillor Adrian Osborne. We won't be undergoing a roll call since we're all here. We now have to introduce the officers in attendance. These will be Jan Robinson, the Corporate Manager for Governance and Civic Office, Henrietta Holloway, the Senior Governance Officer and Clerk to this committee, and Emily Yule, the Monitoring Officer. Next, I should introduce Mr Morelli, the lead petitioner, and those members of Sudbury Town Council who will be addressing the committee today. So, Mr Morelli, welcome to this committee. Councillor Jack Owen, the Mayor of Sudbury, and Councillor Sue Ayres, Sudbury Town Councillor and not coincidentally a Babergh District Councillor. So we come to the review itself. Now, the review process requires us to have a protocol. The protocol has been exhaustively prepared based upon previous practices in regulatory and licensing committees, with reference to other protocols adopted to ensure that everybody is quite clear as to who will speak, what will happen, when it will happen, and to ensure that everybody has had a fair opportunity to present a case and to ask questions before we can make any recommendations as to our purpose. So you have the protocol before you. That protocol is agenda item 4 on the papers. That's the physical papers. It's entitled Protocol for Reviewing Petitions Validation Process. Has everybody had a chance to review that protocol, and do they clearly understand the meaning of the protocol? OK, can I ask for a proposer to adopt the protocol for the purpose of this meeting?
I'm happy to propose it, Chair.
Can you raise a hand, please? OK, I have Councillor Grandin. Are you proposing, Councillor Grandin?
I'll second it, Dawson.
Yes, I'm happy to do that.
OK, I have Councillors Dawson and Gould wishing to second, but that's fine. We'll take Councillor Gould, whose hand was raised, if you don't mind. Councillor Grandin proposes, Councillor Gould seconds. At this point, we would now go to the Modern Gov. There's no point in debating this unless... No, there's no point in debating this, let's be frank. We now go to the Modern Gov voting system. If members can access the top of the agenda, the plus button, and I'll ask the Governance Officer to carry out the vote to adopt the protocol.
Yes, Chair, if members can go to the app, the voting is in progress. If you go to the blue line. So, Chair, that is 6 votes for the protocol.
Thank you very much, Henrietta. Okay, so we now come then to the Corporate Manager for Governance and Civic Office, who will detail the process for the validation of petitions and the process taken in the instance of the validation of Mr Morelli's petition. Jan Robinson you'll have 5 minutes to provide your statement, after which members of the committee will be able to ask questions of her. Jan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. You have before you my report that details the validation process of petitions. I'm not going to go through the whole of that report, but I would like to highlight the following key points. The Council does not have a statutory requirement to provide a petitions process, but chooses to have one because it does welcome the view of its residents and recognises that it's a method where they can raise their concerns. The Council adopted the model petitions policy that was formulated by the now amalgamated Department of the DCLG and confirmed in the Local Democracy, Economic Development and Construction Act 2009. A number of other councils have also adopted this model petition schemes. We are not the only council that sets out these requirements. Our petition scheme is clearly set out in the Constitution under Part 3, paragraph 2.2, and lists the criteria that the petition must meet to ensure that the petition is valid. Mr Morelli's petition was assessed by the committee officer and was rejected for validation because the full address of the persons supporting the petition had not been submitted as detailed in Part 3, paragraph 2.2, where it clearly states that this is a requirement of the petitions process and is advised also in the check form and example attached to the petitions process. It is important that the Council validates each petition to ensure that the petitioners live, work or study in the area and that the petition is genuine. It is also essential that the Council has the full name and address of the petitioners so it is able to contact them to provide them with any further information regarding the petition or if the Council wishes to consult with the petitioners further. This cannot be done from a postcode. Provision of the full name and address also enables the Council to be able to validate the petition to avoid any fraudulent submissions that may result in the Council taking a decision based on incorrect representation and incorrect information. It is also important that the validation process is consistent and in line with our Council procedures. Once the committee officer realised that he was unable to validate the petition, he consulted with myself as the Deputy Monitoring Officer and immediately wrote to Mr Morelli explaining that a postcode did not provide sufficient detail for due diligence to be carried out. This approach is consistent with other petitions that we have also rejected on the same grounds. A further complication was not all petitioners had endorsed all 3 issues and the signature count was different for each of those issues. This could lead to confusion and misrepresentation, and this was also explained to Mr Morelli. The committee officer offered advice and assistance to Mr Morelli on how to enable the petition to be validated so that it could be actioned. Mr Morelli was signposted to the petition scheme as well, which enables the petition to be completed electronically for convenience and also to comply with the current COVID lockdown procedures. The lead petitioner contacted the Council to say he was not prepared to provide 20 names and addresses to validate the petition. At this point, and recognising the work and huge effort that Mr Morelli had undertaken to collect all the signatures, Mr Morelli was invited to the next full Council meeting to address the Council on the parking element of his petition, this being the only element of the petition that was yet to be resolved. While the Council applauds the work that Mr Morelli has carried out to capture public feeling and recognises his strong feelings on the subject and those of our residents, the Council must follow the rules within its own constitution and apply a fair, consistent process when validating petitions across the board. As the Corporate Manager for Governance and Civic Office and the Deputy Monitoring Officer that oversees this process, I am satisfied that the Council did follow this process correctly in an impartial, fair and consistent manner. Although the Council was not able to validate the petition in its current form, the Council has worked hard to ensure that Mr Morelli had the ability to address full Council to air the views of the residents This would have been the same outcome if the petition had been validated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jan, for that presentation. I'll now invite members, if they have any questions they would like to ask of the officer. Can I just point out, could I ask members who are not speaking, not involved in debate, if they could turn their cameras off? It's just a matter of bandwidth. We have at least one member who has difficulties today. Thank you very much. So, members, over to you. Have you any questions for the corporate manager? Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Jan, there's one or two things that as I was reading it, I didn't find very clear. So if you don't mind, within the petition process, it talks about name and addresses. I understand that. But then we get or work or study. Can you just explain? Does the petitioner have to put the name and address regardless of where they live?
Yes, they do.
Right.
So anybody can start a petition. They don't even have to be 18 years of age. They have to live, work or study in the area, but the requirement is that they provide a full name and address.
Now, if I don't live in the area, but I've given you my address, you are able to access through which sort of electoral roll or council tax payment?
We wouldn't, if that was the case, we wouldn't be able to access through the electoral roll, possibly, but we could write to you to check that that you are actually who you are and living at that address. So that would apply in those incidences. And
would you access the workplace or the place of study just to check that I'm who I say I am?
Not necessarily the workplace or study. We would look at the address, and we would possibly write to a selection of those petitioners to ask them if they worked or study if their address was outside of the area.
So
sorry. Councillor McLaren, you continue. I just wanted to point
one of the other questions was what constitutes an area of the council?
So it is the Babergh area that we're talking about.
So as long as I live within that area,
yes.
Okay,
yeah.
That's fine. In 3.1b, it talks about circumstances when an ordinary petition can go to the council for debate for validation.
This would be on page 16 for people looking at the papers.
Yes. So
this defines the types of petition.
Yeah.
So there's, sorry, Councillor.
No, John, I wasn't giving you a chance to reply. It was just that in what circumstance then, as that's written, in what circumstance would that happen?
So an ordinary petition that reaches 1,000 valid signatories, which have been validated, would be reported to and debated at a meeting of the council.
Right.
However, if the subject has been debated already in the year beforehand, we would not do that because there's no point absolutely going for a debate on council when that debate has already taken place.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you, Chair.
Just for clarity, I note that the template in Appendix B of the petition scheme does include a relevant box for live, work or study, so that the clarity can be sought.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, I have Councillor Gould. Councillor Gould, your hand's gone down again.
Sorry, I was muted. Do beg your pardon. I've got a couple of questions here. The first one on page 14, which is the petition scheme. It is on 2.2 again. It does say the name, address or place of work or study, which I found was just a bit ambiguous. And I was just wondering whether for me, when I read that, I took it to be that it's the name, because there's a comma, address or place of work or study. So it could either be presumably your personal address or the address of your place of work or study.
Yes, that would suffice, actually. Yeah.
Yes. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the address of your residence. It could be the address of your place of work or study.
Yes.
But nevertheless, it needs an address.
And it needs an address where we can contact you is the key point.
That's the key thing. And my second question is this, the petition scheme was actually adopted by Council on the 19th of March 2019. Is it revisited annually to be not re-adopted, but to just be looked at and taken down off the shelf and made sure that it's still fit for our purpose?
Yes, Councillor. So within our constitution, we have a duty to review our constitution every year. In 2019, we done a line-by-line review, and that review is carried out by the Constitution Working Group, which is a cross-party group of councillors, and we literally go through the Constitution line by line to ensure that we have everything up to date, because things do change, and you know, we may need to do some changes. Those changes then come to council for council to approve.
Did you say that happens annually?
We're duty bound to do it annually, but we've done a full review back in 2019, so we could do a light touch review, which is just going through and checking with Constitution Working Group. There may be some changes. Some of the recent changes are obviously around how holding virtual meetings, but a line by line review was undertaken back in 2019 by the Constitution Working Group.
So presumably, if anybody felt that any of the Constitution needed a slightly more in-depth, assessment between the in-depth reviews, there is a mechanism for that to happen.
Yes, they can write to the monitoring officer, who would look at the case, and if they felt that it was justifiable, we would obviously convene a meeting of the Constitution Working Group.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair, from me. Thank you.
Councillor Gould. Just as a member of the last Constitution Working Group, I can assure members that it was extensive. Multiple meetings were held at a time when it was face-to-face. We literally went through every line. Now then, Councillor Dawson, I have next.
Yes, Jan, I just wonder whether you can clarify for me. Am I correct in understanding when someone gives their postcode for an address, like mine, for instance, IP75DZ, number 5 is my house number and DZ is the street. Is this not the same for all these postcodes that would be on, that it goes to the house? It's not an area. So we would be able to identify quite easily each address, because every individual's postcode is clearly different.
It doesn't go directly to the house, so it would go to a group of houses in that street. The postcode does not just apply to one address. It does in some circumstances, but in others you can have, for instance, where I live, my postcode applies to 8 houses within the close that I live.
So would that not be reasonable? You know, if we've got the name of the person and in here, it says quite clearly that you want to check that they're validated, the addresses. If you had the name and the postcode, surely that would be sufficient?
No, it's not sufficient, because, as I say, we haven't got the officer resource to comb streets looking for people's names. Some people, because of the villages that we live in, there's families that live along the same street, which confuses matters as well. But the other issue, the more important issue, is that we need the full name and address so that we can contact the petitioners if we need to. So that's the reason, you know, the main reason is so that we are able to contact those petitioners.
So does that mean then, with these addresses you've got, you've checked them?
We check we take a sample.
Right.
I just point out that, as a former postman, a postcode can cover 20 or more addresses in some instances, and they're not always in the same street. The postcode system is not as all-encompassing as people might think, and for that reason, letters are often misdirected. but that's just a personal observation. I have Councillor Grandin up.
Sorry, I haven't finished.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Dawson, my apologies.
I was rudely interrupted again.
It wasn't meant to be rude.
No, but I mean, if we're taking a sample, I don't quite understand. I mean, we do this in businesses. Why, if you thought that you can just check if it was 8 or 10 houses, if the intention is just exactly the same as if someone wrote down and put a fraudulent address, I mean.
So we checked to make sure that they're not fraudulent and the people are who they are. But as I said before, the most important fact is that we have the people's name and address so that we can contact them if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chair. I hope I'm not repeating something that someone else has already said because of my technical issues I may have missed. But I'm wondering, going back to 2.2 again, whether there could be considered a bit of ambiguity in that address does not say the word full in front of it. If it said full address, then there would be complete clarity. Where it just says address, some people might, especially as, you know, when we have to validate ourselves quite often when we make calls to organisations, we get asked for our postcode and so on. Quite often nowadays people think of their postcode as their address. Without the word full in front of the word address, do you think that could be leaving ourselves open to the kind of situation that has arisen?
Councillor, a postcode to me is not the name and address. An address, and the address is the street and the town or the village that you live in. So okay, there could possibly be an amendment that we could make to put full name and address, but it does quite clearly ask for the name and address, and it does on the form attached to it, and also in the other part of the actual template for the petition as well.
That template and the form also don't say the word full, so it's sort of the same situation. So I think we're almost leaving ourselves open to this type of situation arising, and it having been said that this has happened before, maybe that's something that we may need to look at then, so that we can stop it happening perhaps in the future.
We can certainly take that away, Councillor, to have a look at if we need to tighten up the wording on there. Yeah.
Yes,
point
the word
taken.
full.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grandin. I'd just like to note at this point, and I don't know if I can phrase this as a question to Jan, but am I not correct in thinking that the word must is used if the word full is not? Under 2.2, petitions submitted to the council must include the following. And the word must is also used in the sample petition, and I think at another point within the petition scheme, yes, Appendix A, it must meet the council's petition scheme requirements. This use of the word must does seem to me to be, well, quite straightforward. It must. A postcode, everybody knows their address, but perhaps not everybody knows their postcode. Am I correct in my understanding, Jan? So
must, is a term that we use quite a lot in the Constitution, and it does mean, as it says, must. If there was any ambiguity around that, we would have put may rather than must, but because the wording is must, there is no leeway really. It's got to be the full name and address.
Thank you. That was the point I wished to find out. Okay, if there are no other questions from any members, are there any? So I will now invite Mr Morelli to summarise his views on why the steps taken to validate his petition were inadequate. Mr Morelli, you have 5 minutes to summarise these reasons, and I'll then invite the Sudbury Town Councillors to speak, and then I'll invite questions from members for yourself, if that's okay.
All right. Thank you, Chair. As members of this committee may be aware, in the run-up to this meeting, I learned that the monitoring officer took a much narrower view than myself on the remit of the review to be carried out by this committee. Because of the limited remit which this committee has now been advised that it has, I'm unsure if the committee, through no fault of its own, will be able to conduct a full and fair review of my petition's rejection. In addition, to have the same people who oversaw Babergh's refusal to accept my petition, the monitoring officer and the deputy monitoring officer, be advising the committee on what it is and isn't allowed to do in its review and what is and isn't in its remit, seems likely to me to be a conflict of interest. However, with this dispute over the committee's remit and all the other roadblocks upon roadblocks that I've faced in appealing Babergh's decision, it is easy to lose sight of the most important part of all of this, the actual points raised within the petition. Democracy is damaged when processes become more important than issues themselves, as has happened here in the dispute over my petition's validity. These issues will affect real people, from the businesses that would be harmed with the rash removal of free parking from Sudbury, to the heritage that could be lost if the Bellevue land sale is not handled with care, to the most vulnerable in our community that will suffer from Babergh's plans to move the customer access point to Sudbury Library and staff it for only 2 full days a week. This is why I find it disgraceful that Babergh, instead of focusing on the actual issues at hand, has continuously placed barrier after barrier in the way of allowing the issues at the heart of all of this to be properly heard at all. This is why I'm pushing for this petition to be accepted, so that these issues, which will affect real people, can be properly heard and debated at Babergh Full Council. Babergh District Council are fully aware of the strength of feeling that has been transmitted through this petition, whether they choose to accept it or not. They know that over 1,600 signatures have been obtained during a time in which Sudbury was in Tier 4 and then lockdown, restrictions. To quote an email to Babergh from the chair of the Sudbury Society, in which they comment about the individual sheets of paper that make up this petition. You can throw them away, burn them, or just disregard them, but the opposition they represent won't go away, and you know it. I'd like to take the opportunity to address some inaccuracies and confusing statements in report BRP 21 from the monitoring officer presented to this committee. With the time limit I have for this speech, I'm not able to respond to every statement in the report that I object to, so I will respond to the ones that I believe are the most inaccurate. Paragraph 4.7 in this report states that signatories' names and addresses are checked against the open electoral register. However, this method of signature verification is still possible when only postcodes are provided. Even without full addresses, the postcodes can still be matched against the electoral roll. It is not explained within the report why such a method of verification is not possible, with only postcodes provided. Paragraph 4.11 states that, quote, the validation of the full name and address of each signatory also enables the council to avoid accepting any signatures which may have been submitted fraudulently. However, no information is given for how this would be possible at all, and for why it is not possible with postcodes instead of full addresses. Paragraph 4.13 states that, quote, not all of the petitioners had endorsed all 3 issues contained in the petition. This statement is misleading and seems to deliberately lack context. Babergh District Council know full well that only 11 signatories signed a partial petition. This is in comparison to the 1,662 people that signed the petition as is. Without the context, I accept that this could be seen as a problem, but when the context is provided, it becomes clear that this issue is so minor as to be completely irrelevant. Paragraph 4.17 states and strongly implies that my invitation to attend full council would have produced the same outcome as, quote, if the petition had been validated. This is patently false. It was made clear to me that, if I attended the full council debate on the Hadley car parking petition, car parking would be the only matter allowed for discussion, not any of the 2 remaining issues on my petition. If my petition is accepted, I will be able to address a full council debate on all 3 issues. It is therefore clear to see that the opportunity I was given to address full council would not, quote, have been the same outcome, end quote, as if this petition had not been rejected. To close, I mentioned earlier in my speech that I was unsure if the committee would be able to conduct a fair review of my petition's rejection. with the remit that it has been told that it has. However, I still hold out hope. I would urge this committee to recommend to full council that this petition be accepted so that the issues raised, all of which will affect real people, can be properly debated by the full council. And thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr Morelli, for your presentation and a well-constructed argument. If I might move on then to the Sudbury Town Councillors who've expressed a wish to speak. These would be first Councillor Owen, the Mayor of Sudbury, and Councillor Ayres. Councillor Owen, you have 2 minutes if you'd like to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, for affording me the opportunity to speak in support of Thomas Morelli's petition, covering the Sudbury Advice Centre, the sale of Bellevue House and adjacent land, and the introduction of car park charges across Babergh. I will try not to go over the same areas covered by Thomas, but with such a narrow remit, that may prove difficult. Whilst understanding the need for a consistent approach to the presentation of a petition, and I believe a consistent level of circumstances could assist in that process. Now, I'm not blaming the committee, Babergh District Council or the monitoring officer for the circumstances that we've been facing over the last 11 months. But I'm suggesting that trying to abide by the rules at the time when faced with a pandemic that's resulted in a total lockdown across the entire country, with instructions by the government to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. And at a time of celebrating Christmas, when people's minds are elsewhere, coupled with a different timetable for the 3 issues contained within the petition, does not lead to an easy environment for democracy to flourish. Sometime earlier last year, Babergh District Council carried out a survey to seek guidance on the public views of the future development of Market Hill in Sudbury. At that time, it would suffice for those taking part in the survey to just put their postcode in their response. Petitions and surveys are to give the public an opportunity to express their feelings over a chosen topic or topics. One is conducted by an authority who are seeking to change things. The other is conducted by a member of the public who opposes the changes suggested. We need to apply consistency. It should make no difference who is conducting the survey / petition. In conclusion, Chair, I feel that a level of common sense should apply, bearing in mind the timing of the announcing of the 3 issues. I'm nearly finished, Chair. The extraordinary circumstance of the pandemic that I mentioned earlier, and the enthusiasm of the young person who took it upon himself to go to such extraordinary lengths to gain so many signatures in seeking out democracy. 662 local citizens in such a short time period. I urge you to recommend to overturn the decision, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Owen. I don't think anybody on the committee doubts the effort and the extraordinary degree of work done by Mr Morelli. It's in fact praised within the report itself. I'll now turn to Councillor Ayres. If you'd like to speak, you have 2 minutes, Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Chair. What more can I say apart from I think Thomas is wonderful. He'll make a wonderful lawyer and I think he's brilliant. Had we not have been in lockdown, I would have been outside the town hall collecting full names and addresses. This was impossible. So I'm sorry we haven't got the full addresses, but I'm more worried about what does this say to our young people? Is this democracy? No, it's bureaucracy gone balmy as far as I'm concerned. How many times when you have a petition do you actually check on the addresses? I actually offered with the electoral roll to go through and find the names and addresses. So I really do feel that this should be listened to. And I know that you have your reasons and I can understand them, but this is during a pandemic. We have got to be flexible. That's all I'm going to say, apart from well done, Thomas. We are very proud of you. Sudbury is very proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ayres. At this point, we come to the next part of the protocol. Councillor Dawson, did you have something you wish to ask? Or I think we're actually not at that point. We're coming to the point now where I will invite questions from members for Mr Morelli. Is that something you'd like to address?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Then Councillor Dawson, followed by Councillor Grandin.
Yes, Thomas, thank you very much. Owen Hadley, we're delighted with what you did. And, you know, I recognise it's very hard work and fully supported what you do, or what you did rather. But can I just ask you why it's not really clear in here, why you weren't prepared to, for the sake of argument, and to get this through, to provide 20 names and addresses to validate the petition? Because it's, you know, you might not have agreed with it, but for the sake of getting it into council, if it had been me, I would have just gone and got them. And also, you then sort of went on to decline the invitation to speak. So, you know, it's a shame, really, because you had two sort of quite good opportunities. It's almost like you sort of cut off your nose to spite your face. And as I said, you know, I fully support this petition. So I'm just wondering why you didn't really do that. And it's not clear in here.
All right, so yes, I'd be happy to answer those questions. Firstly, it's a shame that I wasn't able to mention it during my speech because of the time constraints. But with regards to the 20 names and addresses, I feel like, especially in the report, it again hasn't been put across with the fullest of context, because this is something I checked early on. If I collected and submitted 20 names and addresses, and I wasn't averse to doing it, but if I did, it would have then been treated as a petition of only 20 names and addresses. And this was something I clarified with the committee's officer who emailed me to inform me of this. And this I actually did, I believe, on the 13th. Yes, because this was when, before I sent my original letter, and one of the Sudbury Town councillors who co-signed my original letter wanted me to clarify that. But yes, if I collected 20 names and addresses, it would have only been treated as a petition of 20, meaning it wouldn't, in my understanding and from everything I've heard, it would then not have been eligible to go to full council for a debate. So in that respect, there was no point in getting 20 names and addresses, or 20 addresses rather, because it would still not have gone to full council. And
Can I intervene at this point, Sean? I do apologise for this, but it actually is relevant to Mr Morelli's response. Can we clarify with officers if that is indeed the case? That it would not have resulted in a debate at council. Is that the case or is it not?
Chair, thank you for that. So just to clarify, if the petition had been validated at 26 signatures, it would then have become a valid petition, and we would have had to take action on it. So, and that action would have been dealt with by the portfolio holder and the assistant director, and it would be for them to decide how to take that forward. The petition, if it was validated, would have been reported to council, but not debated.
But the debate was taking place anyway, and Mr Morelli would have had the opportunity to address the council as he would have done in a full petition, thus achieving his objective.
Yes.
But the portfolio,
at least one instance. Is that correct?
Right. The portfolio holder, they wouldn't have allowed it to go to full council though, because she's against it.
It had been agreed, in my understanding and reading of the emails throughout this whole period.
Yeah, but that's because there was 1,600. But if I think what Thomas is saying here is, had he had 20 signatures, the portfolio holder, being Liz Malvesi, would have rejected it, wouldn't she? Because she's against it. So she would have decided, she would have decided it couldn't have gone to full council for debate.
No, it wouldn't have been a matter for the portfolio holder. I've read the emails very closely because I was in.
Sorry, is that just what Jan just said, though?
Well, that's what I thought. I mean, I thought it had already been agreed. I wanted to clarify this point because I think it's important.
Can you sorry, you're saying something completely different to what Jan's saying now, I think.
No, I'm trying to get some clarity in the point. Perhaps Jan could comment upon that. That the eventual result, regardless of status or anything else, would have been Mr Morelli able to address the council during a debate on at least one of the three subjects that were contained within his petition. Is that a correct understanding?
Mr Morelli was offered the opportunity to come to council as our guest to debate to speak to council during the debate about parking. The ordinary petition status, just to clarify, once the petition becomes an ordinary petition, i.e. it's validated, it would then go through our petitions process. So it would be down to the assistant director and senior leadership team in consultation with the portfolio holder on how they dealt with that petition. And you know, it will be down to them. But they could take any action, and one of those actions may have been a council debate. You know, it's not ruled out.
And again, on the other hand, if they're against it, if I may finish, sorry, if they're against it, they would probably not do that.
Well, they would need to have a good reason why not to do it, and also they would have to take into account the number of signatures that were obviously on that validated petition.
And again, I just want to clarify this point, because again, I read all the emails whilst they were being produced. And in fact, I believe that the leader had made this offer himself, that the opportunity to address that would be done. So I don't think the cabinet members' view would necessarily have come into play. It certainly didn't appear that way from reading the emails whilst they were being sent backwards and forwards. I do apologise for interrupting you, Councillor Dawson, but I thought it was important to draw this point out. Would you like to continue?
Yes. So sorry, Thomas. So your understanding was that obviously it wouldn't go to full council if you only put 20 addresses in, I think.
Well, yes. I mean, I think what sort of happened here is there's been a confusion in this discussion that's just been had right now. There's been a bit of confusion between the statutory right I would have had to, and the right there would have been for a full council debate had it been classed as a validated petition of over 1,000 signatures, and the offer that was made to me to attend the debate on the Hadley car parking petition. And from listening just now, it's clear that those two have been confused. And I was about to come on to that on the second prong of your question, but I'll just answer that now. Yes, so I was offered to speak at full council purely with regards to Hadley car parking. The corporate manager for the Governance and Civic Office gave me a ring, gave me a phone call on the same day as Councillor John Ward's email that Councillor McCraw refers to there, offering me the opportunity to speak at this full council debate. But it was made clear to me that it would only be on Hadley car parking. It would only be on car parking. I would not be able to address the Bellevue land sale. I would not be able to address the closure of the customer access point. And frankly, and this is, I'll admit, this is a personal consideration, but I considered it would be a disservice of what is now effectively my duty representing these petition signatories to go ahead with this, because it would mean that only one of the three issues would be heard. And yes, and just to follow back on what's been said on if I'd submitted 20 names and addresses, it would then, from what I understand it and from what the corporate managers just said, it would then be classed as an ordinary petition of 20 signatures. So as far as I could see, and from everything that was told to me before this meeting, from the 13th of January, from the 12th to the 12th of January onwards, it would not go to full council for a debate.
I would agree with you, probably.
Okay. I mean, whether it's statutory or de facto, okay, we can argue the difference there, but the de facto position might have existed. Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm chairman of the council, Thomas, and I was very disappointed also that you didn't wish to come to full council when you were given the opportunity. I want to emphasise that in discussions I had with the governance and monitoring officers, we were very mindful of the fact that you had put so much effort into collecting the signatures, and we particularly were keen to give democracy the chance to speak. We saw democracy as the most important thing here, and so we were bending over backwards really to try and give you the opportunity to speak, despite the fact that factually the petition hadn't been properly carried out. So despite that, you know, we wanted you, we really wanted you to come to the council to speak, to give you the opportunity to represent Sudbury. And so, you know, it was a little bit disappointing really that you didn't want to take up that offer. And, you know, there might have been a later opportunity for you to talk about Bellevue House, because that matter wasn't wasn't coming up at that day, and the access point had already been decided. So there were clear reasons why, and it was all explained to you. And the other thing I just wanted to make clear as well is that everyone that's been dealing with you really admires what you're doing. And so, you know, that's another reason why we wanted to give you this opportunity. So, you know, it wasn't for wanting to make this happen. We wanted for you to have this moment. What's your feeling? Did you not feel as if we were bending over backwards to give you the chance?
Well, first of all, thank you for your incredibly kind words. And yes, I'll address what you said in the order you've said it. So first of all, you mentioned, you used the phrase bending over backwards to do this. And I appreciate this. Yeah, I mean, it was certainly, I recognise, obviously, that it's not an ordinary thing to do to allow someone like me with what is essentially an invalidated petition to talk to full council in this way and address full council in this way. But from my perspective, I didn't think I'd be able to sort of personally reconcile with it, because you've said just now, and it's that Bellevue might come up later, and I might have had a chance to discuss on the other issues later on. First of all, that wasn't told to me. It was just, as I recall, it was just car park it. Do you want to? We'd like to invite you to speak on this Hadley car parking petition, and it certainly wasn't mentioned either of the other issues, except for the fact I wouldn't be allowed to discuss them at the full council meeting. And this was, as I said earlier, this offer was made by the corporate manager on a phone call to myself. And then after that phone call, I got a further email from the corporate manager, and then I believe I got an email from Councillor Ward at some point, but I don't believe that's relevant. But anyway, and so I suppose, and yeah, so from my own personal perspective, I didn't think I'd be able to reconcile it with what I said is still my duty to the petitioners to ensure their voice is heard. And in respect of, do I think you've bent over backwards enough, to use that phrase, certainly not yourself personally as, well, certainly I don't have any issue with what you've done personally as chair of the council. I think you are very gracious in allowing me the opportunity to speak at full council. And I mentioned this in my letter to the committee of the 31st of January. There's a last year in June or July, I believe it was, Braintree District Council used their discretion to allow a petition that had deemed to have under 1,000 valid signatures to be debated by the full council. And in the same way, it seems to me, and I believe, that Babergh District Council here would have been well within their authority to say, all right, well, look, we've received this petition. It doesn't have the full addresses, but given the circumstances we're in, we're going to allow it to proceed to a full council debate. And so in terms of giving democracy a chance to speak, I believe that would have been the best outcome. And hence, that's why I'm urging the committee to recommend that this petition be accepted. The next thing, I'm just reading through my notes here. Yes, so, and in terms of the position where I was at, on the 13th of January, when I received this offer to attend full council, it just seemed to me to be not good enough. And again, I'm not saying that to you personally, of course, but just in terms of the general response from the council to the petition, given the circumstances and given the number of signatures it obtained. And I hope that answers your question. Let me know. Please tell me if I've missed something.
Okay, Councillor Grandin.
Yes, thank you. Although, may I just, you did freeze a bit, so I hope I understood all you said completely. But by inviting you to council on that day in January, it would have actually put you in the same position as if your petition had been validated, because it would have given you that opportunity to speak on one of the items, and the other items weren't scheduled anyway.
Would you mind, Chair, if I responded on that?
I've no objection.
Thank you. I don't believe it would be factually the same outcome, because regardless of the state of whether the issues themselves had been decided or hadn't been decided, yes, the customer access point, for instance, I believe that the decision to close / relocate the customer access point from the town hall was made by Cabinet in December, I think it was. But I don't think that should prevent, if a petition comes in with over 1,000 signatures, I don't believe that the fact that a decision has already been made should be enough to disqualify a debate. And yes, they weren't on the agenda for that meeting, but if the petition had been allowed to have a debate, as would be normal for petitions over 1,000 signatures, they would have been put on the agenda and they would have been debated. Whereas at the moment, full council, as I understand it, has only really had the chance to speak on one of the issues, which is car parking, and that was only due to another petition that came in with over 1,000 signatures.
Right, we're now getting into governance issues that are probably not the matter we're here to discuss today.
I apologise.
I'm more than happy, Mr Morelli, by the way, to discuss those with you at a later date. However, for the moment, I'll move on to Councillor Gould, who seems to have her hand up, and then I'll go on back to Councillor Dawson. I have a question myself, but I'll reserve that for later. Councillor Gould.
Thank you. I almost feel we're going round and round in circles here. And when I'm trying to unpick the different threads, and I think it seems to me one of the things is we're sticking on these 20 signatures somehow, Thomas. And I think probably Councillor Grandin has said what I was thinking of saying, which is that the whole council was looking forward to you coming and to hearing what you had to say. And whilst I do appreciate that it was just the car parking that would have been the issue in question, it would have been good to have heard you. So my question was sort of around why you decided not to come, and I think you've already answered that. But I did just want to sort of just put my point again. And also I think if the 20 signatures had come in, it would have then gone. I'm just trying to remember what Jan Robinson said in terms of the direction of travel of this petition then, but it wouldn't have been down to the cabinet member to have refused it. It wouldn't have been her choice to have refused it just because she didn't like the content. There would have been checks and balances, and it would have gone through the system in a way with its checks and balances. So I think I would just like to register that I don't agree that the cabinet member, Councillor Malvisi, would have actually turned it down because she didn't agree with the content. So we are into governance issues, I think. And the Braintree Council, just on my final point, as all of this has been going through my head, they actually had the petition in front of them. It had been validated, and it just seems to me, and Councillor Ayres offered to collect some addresses. So if Councillor Ayres, if her offer had been timely, which I don't know whether it was or not, and you had availed yourself of Councillor Ayres' offer to collect the 20 signatures, the petition would have been validated. And I absolutely hear what you're saying. It would have been a 20 signature petition, but I think we all would have accepted, we all realise that you worked incredibly hard to get to the 1,600 signatures, and it wouldn't have been negated. It would have been there in our debate. There isn't a question there, really. There's a lot of, I'm trying to unpick the threads.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fine. Also,
excuse me, Councillor McCraw, you're on mute. I
didn't like to tell you, Alistair, because we were enjoying you muted.
Hey, that's probably the first time I've ever been observed to be on mute. I'd just like to say, I think we're going back over the same ground. Mr Morelli, you've already answered the essentials of that. It's clear there is a difference. Can you make a brief comment and then we'll move on to the next question?
Yes, to add on what's been said about 20 signatures and what the government and what the corporate manager has said just now, I'm looking back over the emails I've got. It wasn't explained to me what would really happen after 20 signatures had been validated, and as far as I can remember, the only because I'm just looking at Appendix B3 to the monitoring officer's report, and it just says in respect of this, it requires 20 signatures to validate. It doesn't especially specify what would happen after that. And as far as I was concerned, the main objective was a council debate. Then quickly to respond, because I appreciate time limits, on the Braintree petition thing. I'm quoting the Braintree situation as proof that a council in circumstances can take decisions on its own discretion, even when it's not fully compliant. So there is a slight difference in circumstances.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a considerable difference. One would have been a validated petition, perhaps not of the required number. The other one was actually quite clearly not operating according to the petition scheme in action in a very particular matter, that of addresses. Now, I'd like to go back on to Councillor McLaren and then Councillor Dawson. Do you have a further question?
Yes.
OK, Councillor McLaren first then.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Thomas. We're all very sad in some ways that we're here today and listening to you, because it would have been wonderful for us to have listened to you in full council, but that's already been said. One of the things that I want to ask you, when you started your petition, which was absolutely amazing and a lot of hard work, did you actually go on the council website to find out what constituted an acceptable petition?
No, before starting the petition, I did not. To give a bit of background, I was made aware of these issues in late December and was sort of trying to put the petition together and organise everything to do with it. Incredibly short notice and timescale. I can tell you that where I got the sort of idea for the postcodes from was on the UK government petitions website. When you're signing a petition, it asks your postcode, and so I thought this will be it, because obviously I can still really, in terms of especially what's been said in the report about the electoral roll, see no reason why it can't be validated. But that's not on the topic of the question. So to answer your question, no, I wasn't aware of that at the time of starting the petition and only became aware of it afterwards.
All right, so that's a bit sad, really, isn't it, that you weren't able to do that? But I think we do all fully admire you for what you've done. And what were you, when you sort of were invited to the council meeting, what went through your mind? What did you think was going to happen next after that?
Well, in terms of what would happen within the council.
What would happen to your petition? What did you think?
Well, I mean, I guess it's the hope of any person organising a petition is that change will be made, objectionable issues will be dealt with. And as I said, I did this at very short notice. And so only during the organisation of the petition, I at some point found the petition scheme, obviously, because that's why we're here now, and found that, OK, over 1,000 signatures, it will then go to a debate of full council. And that, to me, it seems like the easiest way to have a debate on the issues, and if there is going to be any change, to sort of act as a stepping stone to that change would be a full council debate. And so, of course, the primary aim was is still to get the issues addressed. And I mentioned this in my opening speech, but then obviously it was also a desire to have it debated by the full council.
Yeah. OK. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Yeah.
Just in passing, can I ask members and participants in the meeting to note the message box function is here to help us in technical matters, not for raising points or debating or discussing in any way. That is not part of the meeting, but it is, of course, made public. So please desist. Councillor Dawson.
Yes, this is perhaps you could clarify, Jan, on this regarding, if you look at page 18, 4.6, it says we will not take any action on any petition which the strategic director considers to be vexatious, abusive or otherwise inappropriate. Now, clearly this petition wouldn't really fall, my understanding, is into any of these points here, and therefore 5.1, surely our response should have been one of those 8 points, which we haven't done, which would suggest the process hasn't been done correctly.
Is this a question for Jan Robinson?
Well, I'm just trying to ascertain, because if this has not been done, it means the process wasn't followed correctly, which at the moment I understand it has been.
Jan, what's the reason? That's okay.
Can I
clarify?
Sorry,
yeah,
Jan.
Can I just clarify? So, because the petition at this stage has not reached petition status, the strategic director point only comes in once it's a validated petition. It then goes to the next stage, and we look at the petition, the subjects of the petition, and that's when the strategic director can still rule them out as vexatious, and that's normally when it's about a person. It's the next stage on.
Okay.
I think the report quite clearly states the reason for non-validation was not 4.6, but in fact the addresses and the word, the addresses were not supplied. That's
the magistrate, Alistair, for 13 years, so I'm quite clear about what it says here. But yes, that's what I'm saying to you.
What I'm trying to say is that 4.6 did not enter into the equation. It was entirely based upon the validation principle of not having
address. Well, that's the second stage, yes.
Yes, yeah. But fundamentally, we don't get to the second stage if we haven't got past the first stage.
I think Janice has pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question myself now, if I may. And I just think I'm glad we've had some description of the process under which you address raising the petition. Not a very easy time to raise a petition at any time. Would you accept that had you looked at the Babergh petition scheme prior to embarking on the petition, that it might have been better? Mr. Morelli.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise you'd finished.
No, I apologise. I should have made myself clearer.
No, that's fine. To be perfectly and completely honest with you, before starting this petition, I didn't even realise that a petition scheme was something Babergh had, because in my eyes, and to a point, it's still in my eyes, a petition is just, it's a concept. It's not really intrinsically something that can be set out in a scheme, and which this is why I say the strength of feeling has been expressed, whether or not it is wished to be accepted. And so to a point, I accept that, yes, if I'd looked at it and seen, all right, I need full addresses, then it would have been good. But on the other hand, and I accept this isn't directly relevant here, but there is a case to be made, I feel, about whether or not the requiring addresses to be included would have actually caused some people who would have otherwise signed it to not want to sign it, in view of not wanting to give their full address in relation to a support of this to the council.
But that would imply then, Mr. Morelli, that they would not wish to be associated with it. If they aren't prepared to give their address, how could their participation in the petition be verified? I think we come to a crucial point here. Can I ask also if you had any advice from outside in preparing your petition, and also how you undertook the practical measures of obtaining the signatures and postcodes, because obviously we were in a particularly awkward situation at that time. How did you go about the practicalities of raising the petition?
Okay, I'm just trying to, your first question, I'll just one at a time, was that would they want to be associated with it? I think it's more on that point, because I've been in contact, several petitioners have emailed me who for one reason or another would not object to being associated with the petition, but may fear, it sounds weird to say, but may fear some sort of repercussions, put it that way, of being associated with it. So in terms
Really?
Well, I mean, I'm
genuinely surprised, Mr. Morelli. I honestly am.
It wouldn't be all of them, but it's like with anything. If you ask people for lots of information, then even if they would want to be associated with it, the more information you ask for, as with anything, the less likely they'd want a person would feel up to providing it, or might just think, you know what, I'm not going to do this. And
that would appear to be people asking for a degree of anonymity at the same time as signing a petition, which is also sort of counterintuitive. You can't be both, one or the other.
Well, I'm also addressing that some people would want to sign a petition to object to an issue, but then the more sort of hoops you have to jump through in order to express your views on something would then be sort of a potential off switch to some people who might be otherwise supportive of it. Sorry.
Yeah, and basically, and did you receive any advice from people who'd raised petitions previously? Did you get any support, and how did you practically go about getting the postcodes, as it happens, and the petitioners?
Okay, so in relation to outside advice, I received advice from some friends of mine. I'm unsure if any of them have ever submitted a petition before. I would presume that they have not. In terms of that, does that answer that question?
Sort of. I don't know that we've actually heard that you had advice on the petitions and how a petition could be carried out. That's all. Well, I apologise. I apologise if I've seemed to be pressing on this.
No.
Can I remind members not to use the message box? Frankly, it's getting distracting.
So in terms of, the advice I received was mainly just organisational advice on how to organise it in the first place, and help and assistance with organising it. I didn't get any advice. I'm pretty much certain, bar my memory, but I'm pretty 99% sure I didn't receive any advice on actually what it should contain in terms of names or addresses.
No, that's fine. I mean, to say, everybody's very admiring of the work you've done, literally, as it appears, completely off the cuff. And thank you for all your efforts. Do we have any other? Sorry, Boom.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer your third question.
Oh, of course, yes, there was a third.
How it was done. So it was done via leaflets hand delivered to through letterboxes. This was at a time when Sudbury was in tier 4 lockdown restrictions, I believe. And of course, there is a question to be asked. I guess I'll leave it as an open question if it's justified or not. Legally, I believe it was justified because, for example, there was an exception for it was quite vague. I remember looking at it. It covered voluntary work. But in addition, the way I thought of it was, well, if you were working for example, a company that wanted you to put leaflets through people's doors, that would be allowed under the law covering working during the pandemic. And in terms of risk from COVID on letters and paper put through the door, everything I've read, it seemed to suggest it was of minimal risk to the residents.
That's fine.
And yeah, so
I imagine you have a substantial print bill and have used up every ink cartridge in Sudbury then.
Yes,
that was an aside. I apologise. At this point, if you're all willing, if no members have any further questions, either for Mr Morelli or for the Corporate Manager for Governance and Civic Office, I'd like to ask both parties if they have anything further they wish to add, summarising for maybe 1 minute only. Mr Morelli, do you have anything you wish to add and summarise?
Yes, so in summary, I would say there are lots of issues I raised. I believe I made 9 points in my letter to the committee. It was not possible, especially given the fact that I didn't have sight of the monitoring officer's report when writing that letter, to repeat all of them in my speech. But I would just say I still stand by that letter. And I mean, yeah, and I would in particular emphasise, I know it's been discussed, that the precedent in a way set by Braintree District Council on being able to take action where a petition is non-compliant in some way, be that validation or in that case numbers, reaffirms the ability and authority of a council to do this. And I believe in this circumstance, it is clearly the right thing to do. And by extension, I believe this is what the committee should do by extended authority of obviously being a part of the council. And that is all I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Morelli. I'd like to ask the Corporate Governor, Corporate Manager for Governance, if you have anything to say, Jan.
Not too much, Chair, but just to reiterate that the council must follow the rules within its own constitution and we must apply them fairly and consistently across the board. I am really admiring of the work that Mr Morelli has carried out, and we're always there to help members of the public if they do need to start a petition, and we welcome them and, you know, like to see them coming forward. So, you know, this was never about preventing democracy happening, but it is about making sure that we do follow the rules of our constitution. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. At this point then, members, for the committee only, we now enter the debating period. We can now debate the issues and principally whether we feel that the validation process has been followed correctly as stated in the petition scheme, particularly under the matter of validations, and has it been followed correctly, and has the petition been dealt with adequately under that proviso? So I have hands up from Councillors Grandin and Dawson. Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chair. As chairman, I was able to observe some of the actions that took place in attempting to validate this petition. I would say we did everything we could to help, and that the scheme was followed properly from the council's point of view. And in fact, we did more than that. We did more than we needed to do to validate it, or to help the process rather, because we actually wanted to see democracy done. We wanted to help. And it's unfortunate, I think, had the wording of the original wording being slightly different, that might have helped. But taking things as they are, I think Babergh District Council and its officers did everything they could to do everything correctly and to give enough opportunity for Mr Morelli to be in the same position as if he did have a validated petition. So I would say yes, we did everything we could and should have done.
Okay, Councillor Dawson.
And I actually observed that too.
Yes, I would agree with that, although I supported very strongly your petition, Thomas. The problem here is it's about the process, and I must say it's very unfortunate you didn't submit those 20 names or perhaps come forward. Very disappointing, because that would have been super to see you've done that. But I think, you know, I'd like to think perhaps in future, it's very clear what the intention was here. And I think, you know, Catherine and myself and Councillor Fraser and Hadley, we did everything we could, and half our group supported this petition. And it came down to a few cabinet members who had quite an override, you know, quite more influence perhaps on all of this. But I'd like to think that we wouldn't perhaps be so petty about this business with the addresses, because a lot of people actually just don't want to get, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to put my address on a petition, and I'm sure a number of other people feel the same. But I would support the fact that unfortunately the process has been followed, which would mean that I would have to vote that way. But that's not to say that you've done a fantastic job, Thomas. And don't be, next time, just make sure you get all your dots, well, as I say, crossed and everything. Make sure the procedures followed correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Alistair, or Mr Chair. I think I would. It does seem to me that the council has followed the petition scheme, and I would have to vote for that myself. But I would just like to emphasise yet again that I've been really impressed with Mr Morelli's his tenacity and the way he's really very, very articulate and absolutely spot on really with your arguments. And I picked up from somebody that you might be thinking of being a lawyer, and you would make a jolly good one. But if we feel that the petition scheme is wanting in any way, that perhaps there might be a couple of words we might need to add to this section 2.2 to just make it even more robust. That, I guess, would be a recommendation we could place somewhere, because some of it, I think, is we are where we are, and how do we avoid being in a situation that perhaps we don't want to be in on a future occasion. So that would be something that I would sort of just float, Mr. Chair, really. And I think that's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gould. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that Thomas, I said before, has done a great job and we respect him for that. But he actually was supported by a lot of people who actually could have perhaps encouraged him in the right direction with this process. And I think that is sad that those people didn't do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLaren. At this point, I have a comment I'd like to make, and I think it's germane to the argument. At various times, Councillor Osborne, you have your hand raised, and perhaps you would like to speak, I'll ask.
Oh, thank you for noticing me, Mr. Chair.
I apologise.
I have had it up some time, but you've asked the questions that I was going to ask. First of all, I'd just like to say that great admiration for Mr. Morelli's way forward on dealing with this. I do feel it's unfortunate that, as Councillor McLaren has said, that he hadn't got the advice, and also the look at the actual petition that is down in the Babergh's ways of working, instead of the petition that he produced. Another situation here is that I'm pretty understanding that he actually delivered a lot of these petitions himself, or leaflets himself, which had the setups as we've seen them in the confidential list, and unfortunately it didn't include the address setup that was in the Babergh petitioning scheme. Also, I'd just like to add that actually paper is one of the biggest carriers of any virus or germ. Money is a particular setup, so he ought to have been a little bit more risk averse of all of that. And don't forget, if he's put the petitions, the leaflets through the letterboxes, those letterboxes would also, unfortunately, if other people have touched them to put anything through, would be exactly the same. But again, I've got to support our officer on these questions. They're quite right. The process, I think, was adhered to, and I agree with the other councillors that have spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. On that note, excuse me, Mr. Morelli, I'm afraid we're in debate now, so I can't be taking any more comments at the moment. I will note, however, that we do, in the petition scheme, have provision for e-petitions under Section 6. And officer support is available because we encourage petitions. That's why we have a petition scheme. So for my own points, and perhaps to bring the debate to some understanding, a couple of points I observed is that the use of the electoral roll and the checking mechanism that we use by approaching the open electoral roll. The electoral roll, of course, is organised in street order. It is not organised in postcode order. So it's not as easy to suggest that postcodes necessarily would be a more efficient method. In fact, they'd be a little less efficient method. Most people know their address. They don't necessarily know their postcode. And the other suggestion made during discussion in the emails contained within various papers is that this has been an arbitrary decision. Now, the definition of arbitrary is based on random choice or personal whim, rather than any reason or system. We do have a system. It's our petition scheme, and it should be the guiding principle for any petitions presented to the council. Now, I would agree with the other members who've stated that we followed our scheme according to what it states. We have refused petitions in the past on the basis that they have not been valid. The petition scheme is widely publicised on our website, and it would be quite reasonable just to phone up the councillor or speak to your local councillor and ask what to do. I don't believe there's anybody need have any fears of signing an address. in a petition scheme. What possible comeback could there be? I mean, this is not the way we do things. Nobody would do things that sort of way. So all I can say is I don't think we can argue that the council have not followed the petition adequately. The main point I'm going to say is that I would say that the validation process was followed correctly, and I would propose a motion to that effect. And the petition was dealt with adequately in that respect. The second recommendation I believe we could consider is that the petition scheme only be reviewed fairly soon, that we go through the petition scheme and see if there are improvements that could be made to wording. And I believe that would get some support from members of this committee. I would be happy to propose those two motions. One, that the validation process was followed correctly, and that two, therefore the petition was entitled to be rejected in that sense. The officers made strenuous efforts along with leadership to try and address the central point, whilst not saying that we were going to make an arbitrary decision. We didn't. Second point, the review. Can I have a seconder for those motions? I have Councillor Grandin, then Councillor
I'm happy
Gould.
to do that. Yes.
Councillor Grandin.
I'm happy to do
I'm happy
that.
to second that.
Yes.
Fine.
Yes.
Now then, are there any counter proposals that anybody wishes to make? Is there any discussion that anybody wishes to have? Councillor Grandin, your hand is still up. Is that a legacy? Oh, fine. Okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Henrietta. Have you got that entered onto the system?
We have the, let me just do something here. Could we say that the second one was that the Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommends to Council that the Council's petition scheme be reviewed and updated in line with the comments made at this committee?
I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a recommendation to Council, because I think that is actually already covered under delegated authority for officers to carry out as a matter of course. Jan, could you comment upon that? Or Emily?
Sorry, Chair, it would be Emily Ewell,
Emily.
the Monitor Officer.
Of course, Emily, could you comment upon that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it's actually a recommendation to the Constitution Working Group that the committee would make, and then any changes that the Constitution Working Group decides are appropriate would then be reported to full council for adoption.
Thank you. That's much better phrased, and thank you very much. So it's a recommendation to the working group that a review, and I'm specifying at this point that only the petition scheme be the subject of that review. It's not reasonable for us to ask for a review of the entire Constitution on the basis of today's meeting.
Right, so the petition scheme only. One moment, Chair.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Grandin? As seconder?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Thank you.
Right, Chair, let's see, I'm just seeing how my colleague is getting on.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Osborne.
I've looked at the pieces that's up on YouGov. There are two areas there. One is the protocol, and the other one is going for consideration by the officers of that particular petition scheme. Are we voting on both of those or just the one?
The motion was to vote for recommendation 1 and recommendation 2.
Right, thank you.
The validation process had been correctly followed and the petition was dealt with adequately. And then 2, that the working party carry out a review of the petition scheme only.
Thank you very much.
Right.
We're just waiting for that to appear on the voting box.
We might have to go. Right, I believe.
I think that covers it, that the council followed the validation process correctly and that the petition was dealt with adequately, and the numbering can be changed, that the Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommends to that the Constitution Working Group petition scheme only to be reviewed and recommendation be reported to full council, updated in line with comments made at this committee. Does that meet members' requirements for a valid motion to vote upon?
I believe so. Members, can you please vote? I think the vote is in progress at the moment. I can see people are voting. Chair, that is 6 votes for.
Thank you very much. So that is unanimous. That would close the meeting. But before we do, I'd just like to add a point in summary, and I think it's relevant for Mr. Morelli. I hope you're still here, Mr. Morelli. And it's just a specific point regarding the purpose of any petition scheme. And one of the purposes of a petition scheme is to raise a matter in the public interest and to draw people's attention to that matter. And in all 3 regards, you've done that. All 3 of those points have been discussed, have been debated, and have been considered. And the length of time that these matters have been dealt with in various ways, because they are actually different matters, your points have been taken on board and they have influenced the nature of the decisions that have been made and in some cases will be made. So in that sense, your petition has achieved one of the main purposes, that of drawing public attention. You're to be commended for the massive amount of work you've done. If you're not going to go into the law, well, there's always politics, although you would be well advised to steer clear of that for the meantime. I would just say thank you very much for your efforts and on behalf of the committee, and I hope at any point in the future you have any queries, you bring them to us. So thank you very much, everybody, for the meeting. We'll now close the meeting and thank all members for their attendance, for the members
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
and officers.